Because life is not rosy, welcome to Life in Violet, a feminist option for social change. Life in Violet to build up empowerment for women and girls, a better and safer society for all. Hi, hello everyone. Welcome to a new emission of Life in Violet. Thank you to all the people who are following us from our Facebook profile as Life in Violet and in my own personal profile as well. Bear in mind that you can have our previous broadcasts on our YouTube channel. And I'm not going to add anything more because I don't want to waste one single second of this incredible opportunity. Because today we are going to interview an amazing woman who has made a huge, huge difference for women around the world. And I am talking about MELISSA FARLEY. Welcome, MELISSA. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me, Violet. I'm very happy to be here.
May I read a little introduction? Our topic today is about women and prostitution, and you are really one of the researchers, the feminist researchers who have done the most these recent years. MELISSA FARLEY was born in 1942, and she's an American clinical psychologist, a researcher, feminist, anti-pornography, and anti-prostitution activist. MELISSA is best known for her studies of the effects of prostitution, trafficking, and sexual violence. She's the founder and director of the San Francisco-based organization Prostitution Research and Education. She has been working as a clinical psychologist for over 45 years, and she has consulted with agencies, governments, medical centers, advocates for women in prostitution and trafficked women. These groups include the United Nations, the California Medical Examining Board, the US State Department, the Center for World Indigenous Studies, the Minnesota Indian Women's Sexual Assault Coalition, Refuge House, Breaking Free, VERÓNICA's Voice, and the Cambodian Women's Crisis Center. Farley has been a faculty member of the Center for World Indigenous Studies and has taught seminars on research for social change at the CWIS in Jalapa, Mexico. Farley has 49 publications. We'll go a little bit deeper into this later on. She has 49 publications in the field of violence against women, most of which address prostitution, pornography, and sex trafficking. Her research has been used by governments in South Africa, Canada, France, New Zealand, Ghana, Sweden, the United Kingdom, and the United States to craft policy on prostitution and human trafficking. Farley's research on the trafficking and prostitution of Indian women is the source of a character, Vera, in the acclaimed historical novel The Night Watchman, which has won the Pulitzer Prize. About women and prostitution since 1993, MELISSA has researched prostitution and trafficking in 14 countries. She has written many studies reporting high rates of violence and post-traumatic stress disorder among women employed in the so-called sex trade. And this is an incredible honor for me. And it comes just before our mission of our 4th anniversary. So this is a present from life, really. Welcome, MELISSA, and thank you again for being today with Life in Violet. let's go to our questions if you want. And the very first one, is prostitution a job like any other? And if not, why not?
Well, thank you for that question. It's a very important question, and it is where so many people are confused, because the thing about prostitution that makes it different from other forms of violence against women is one thing. Do you know what that is? It's money. Other forms of violence against women, wife beating, rape, incest, the sexual assault of children, all of these things involve the same thing, the domestic violence. All of these things are just the same in prostitution, but they're paid for. I know we could talk for an hour just about that. How do I know that? Because I've interviewed many, many, many hundreds of survivors of prostitution who have explained to me what their lives are like. And as a psychologist, and when I went to school, I was taught about incest, sexual abuse, rape, domestic violence, but I was never taught anything about prostitution. It was, like you're saying, it was assumed to be an activity, a job, especially a good job for marginalized, poor women. Way too often women who are racially or ethnically marginalized. It's where all kinds of prejudice come in. But I want to emphasize one thing that's so important, Veronica, which is for me and for all of your listeners and for anyone who wants to be an activist or an advocate on behalf of this very vulnerable group of people in the world. You must listen and pay attention to survivors who teach us everything we know. I would not be here today considered some kind of an expert if I didn't listen very, very carefully to women who have gotten out and then talk with people like you and me about what it was like for them. And again, to answer that question, what we usually hear from in answer to is, why don't you just see prostitution as a job? It's a good thing. They make good money. They can pay the rent, feed their kids. Why not? Well, I don't even know if I can say this on the air, but when you talk about prostitution, you really have to get very clear about what it is. Veronica, it's hard for most of us to talk about. It makes me uncomfortable even now to talk about it. We're talking about a job, and I don't think it's a job. I think it's a human rights violation. We're talking about an activity where women usually have no other means of survival, or they've been tricked. They're teenagers and they think, oh man, this is fun. I'm going to make some big money this way. I can buy all the new clothes, cell phone, go to all the concerts I want to. They're tricked by who? By pimps. And by pimps, I include people who run websites like OnlyFans. Those are pimps. They're pornographers, but they're porn pimps. There are people like that all over the internet. They run websites offering jobs to women in Bogota who have immigrated into Colombia from Venezuela, who have they're escaping organized crime, famine, no medication. And what do pimps offer them? A nice job doing photos for OnlyFans. That kind of prostitution is simply filmed prostitution. where she doesn't get to hide her face or anything about herself after she gets out. But it's not a job like any other job. Here's what the job is like. And most people who say, well, it's a job, it's better than nothing, it's better than starving, isn't it? Here's what survivors have taught me. If people like myself who have not been in prostitution, if we want to really, really walk around saying it's a good enough job for somebody else's daughter, somebody else's wife, if we want to say that, then we should put ourselves on the street for 2 days and perform sex acts with unpleasant, smelly, kind of creepy men. After we've done that for 2 days, then maybe we can come back and say, well, that's good enough. Sure, I'd do that. But most of us would not say that. As one girl said, prostitution is sitting on the face of a man your grandfather's age who's calling you horrible, horrible names. I can't say the names on Facebook because they're too awful, but we all know, don't we, Veronica? We know those names, and we know the very, very racist parts of those names that women are called. So it's a joining together. Prostitution is a joining together of racism, sexism, and poverty. And those 3 things create a cage for women. So is that a job? I guess it's something that brings in money if a woman has no other alternatives for feeding her children, for paying the rent. It's an extreme survival alternative, but no girl grows up thinking this would be a great job. The only complicating factor is these days girls are exposed to so much online messaging about how cool it is to earn good money by taking your top off for the boys in your class, and they all pay you X amount of money. It's unfortunately, children are being groomed today to learn that prostitution is just a normal activity, and it's not. It is not a normal job. It's not work, and it's also not sex. Sex means we choose who we want to be intimate and sexual with. Usually it's somebody you and I like or were turned on to. It isn't somebody who just says, lay down, spread your legs, here's $50. That's not who we would choose. So it's not a job and it's not sex.
Yep. Absolutely not. Whenever I come across somebody who says that, why not? I go to the absurd and I said, okay, so I guess you are envisaging that for your daughter as a career, for instance. And that comes with a shock.
Yes.
And it's just a kind of saying, okay, it's not a job. If it were a profession, a glamorous profession, everybody would be dreaming of their daughters or even sons pursuing that career. And it's only, as you said, I would emphasize on the fact that money seems to legitimize that. It's
absolutely. What a good point. Yes. Money legitimizes it. And when a government, for example, the Netherlands or Germany, when a government says this is a legitimate job, people actually believe that, in citizens in the country. So for sure, we can never stop all crimes, can we? We can never stop murder. We can never stop someone from hurting their spouse or their child, but And whether or not we can stop prostitution, I don't know. I'm willing to give it a very good try, though. But laws say this is what we, the Argentinian people in the US, this is our values. This is what we want. As the Swedish Minister for Gender Equality, Margareta Winberg, once said, do we want to set aside a special class of women and girls who are available in Sweden for sexual use, mostly poor, mostly young, mostly racially or ethnically marginalized? She said this in 1999, and she was so right. Of course, the answer is no. Let's not set aside this special class of vulnerable humans in every country in the world that we say, well, not me, not my daughter, not my classmates, but oh, it's okay for her over there because she's different. She's different. I guess one thing that I learned, and I've never quite understood, Veronica, why does any woman think that a woman who's prostituting is any different from you or me? To me, she's exactly the same as me. I mean, if I were in a bad place, if my children were hungry, if my grandchildren were hungry, and there was nothing any place, and someone said, if you do this, I will give you 2 bags of food for your kids, that's a no-brainer. We don't want her or ourselves or any woman to ever be in that position, ever.
Absolutely, absolutely. Melissa, I'm going to show you the image of a book that you will recognize, of course. This is Prostitution, Trafficking, and Traumatic Stress that you wrote. The book begins with a terrible description of Jay Gutt. She's a former prostitute, and she describes her encounter with a, let's say, client, or John, or putero in Spanish. And she says, I'd freeze up inside. It was horrible. They'd look you up and down. That moment when you felt them looking at you, sizing you up, judging you. And those men, those fat pigs who weren't worth half as much as the worst of us, they joke, make comments. They made you turn and face in all directions because, of course, a front view wasn't enough for them. It used to make me furious, but at the same time, I was panic-stricken. I didn't dare speak. I wasn't physically frightened, but it shook my confidence. I felt really demeaned. I was the thing he came and literally bought. He had judged me like he judged cattle at a fairground, and that's revolting. It's sickening. It's terrible for the women. You can't imagine it if you've never been through it yourself. That is from your book, which was published in 2004. This harm, this terrible ordeal, and this terrible tearing of the woman who is prostituted, no? The harm of prostitution is socially invisible, and it is also invisible in the law, in public health, and in psychology. So what are the connections of prostitution with pedophilia and human trafficking, of course, pornography? Can you please tell us about that?
Sure. Well, thank you, first of all, for reading that quote from Chaguet, who was part of a movement in France many, many years ago to protect women in prostitution. And I also I think that quote is very powerful. It explains she may, anyone on the outside might see a girl or a woman, and including old women also these days who don't have alternatives. Any girl or woman would be likely to feel that way. What you do is you shut yourself down psychologically. She describes freezing up in that moment. That's a description of dissociation, which is a psychological process that human beings do when they're faced with overwhelming cruelty on the part of mostly another human. It's very traumatic to be in a fire or an earthquake or a flood, but it's not as bad as when you're a slave and treated horribly by your master, or you're in a concentration camp and a Nazi treats you like an insect that needs to be exterminated. I mean, these things, this kind of attitude of dehumanization, turning her into a thing to be used. As a German man I just interviewed in the last year and a half said, the man relieves himself on her and pays her for it. And I would say on her or in her, he relieves himself. That statement on the part of the sex buyer perfectly reflects what women tell us about the experience of prostitution, which is this woman felt like she was a cow at a marketplace being judged for its value. Another way of describing the experience of having a man relieve himself in you or on you, women say they feel like human toilets. Now that's such an awful feeling, Veronica, such a horrible feeling. What would you or I or anyone do if we're being subjected to that kind of horrific treatment? We shut down emotionally. We put a mask on. If we can, some people can do this, some people can't. If we can, we go up to the top of the ceiling and we watch as our body is subjected to really awful, painful, degrading humiliations. So that's what happens. And you asked about, I mean, to talk about pedophilia, I'm giving you pretty long answers to these. I hope that's okay. Interrupt me. Okay. Interrupt me if it's too long. The question about pedophilia, a lot of well-intentioned people focus on children, on the horrible fact that little kids, sometimes, 8, 10, 14, 17 years old, little kids are tricked or grabbed or used or exploited because they're hungry, or terrorized. Most people in prostitution experience some form of interpersonal terror from the others that control them, whether it's pimps or puteros. So little kids are easier to control than adults. We all know that. That's fact number one about why there are children in prostitution. Number two is that puteros like them young. They just like young girls. If you look at most movies today, who is the sexualized heroine, the big star in the film? It's a young woman. She isn't even 35 years old. She's more like 20. Right? So the men are taught in our cultures, I think yours as well as mine, they're taught to like a sexual version of a pretty young female, too young, really, in my opinion, but they learn to be turned on to that. And pimps, above all, are businessmen. They're interested in money. They're not interested in being bad. They just want to make money, and they don't care how they make it or who gets hurt in the process. So pimps know puteros like them young, and that's who they try and get. It's as simple as that. Who are the ones they tend to get? Children who are not protected in their community or their family, children who have been sexually abused. And so the pimp comes along and says, hey, in the US, hey girl, you have gold between your legs. You're just giving it away for free. Why not make money? And since that's all she knows, she thinks, why not get paid for it? So they're doing it to me anyway. My uncle, my cousin, my boyfriend, they're all doing it. I'm not really having fun. In fact, it hurts a bunch of the time. So why not get paid for it? So pimps are very, very, very clever at exploiting children's vulnerability and young women's vulnerability. It doesn't cut off at age 18. Women are still vulnerable at age 22, 25. But there's almost this obsession in the anti-trafficking movement with children. I don't agree with that. And in the US, what I say to anti-trafficking groups who try to raise money and do nothing else but save children, I say to them, you know, in the United States, we had a system of slavery that enslaved African people from West Africa for hundreds of years. Do you think we would have stopped slavery if we went on to these cotton plantations and said, I want to talk to everybody who's under the age of 18. I'm going to rescue them and get them out of slavery, but I'm not going to get their mamas, their papas, their cousins, right? Do you see what I'm saying? If we're going to shut down the system of prostitution, which includes all kinds of people, not just little kids, but their mothers, it includes trans people, it includes men. Prostitution is a money-making enterprise, end of story. So I think we have to include everyone. That's the first thing I want to say. Do I think it's horrible when children are sexually exploited? Yes. Do I think we have to only focus on them? No. I think we have to end the institution of prostitution. There was this speaking of pedophiles again, to get back to your question, there was this wonderful research done in the United States in the city of Atlanta, Georgia, where they did this very clever research. They put an advertisement up online that said, hot young girl, new in town, I want a date. The researchers put that up, and then they got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of phone calls, right? Because the code words there are young, probably a minor. New in town means probably trafficked and very vulnerable. So hot young thing, new in town, something like that. They got hundreds of calls. The researchers gave the callers 3 separate warnings that the person they were about to buy was a child. The first warning was something like, I don't have an ID on her. Is that okay? Oh, and a lot of them said yes. Second warning was, I'm not sure how old she is. I'm not sure if she's 16 or 20. In other words, under the legal age or over the legal age. I'm not sure what age she is. Is that okay? A bunch of them went past that. The third warning was given, which went like this: I think she might be a minor. Is that still okay with you? Now, here's what I want to tell you, Veronica. Of hundreds of men who called in about that ad, 47% of them were willing to buy a child after 3 warnings that the kid was probably a child. So does that tell you that pedophilia really has nothing to do with prostitution? You know, maybe there's some pedophiles who like to rape infants or 5-year-olds. Yes, that's a problem, and they're in a separate category of criminals. But most puteros like them young in Argentina and in the United States and every place else. Partly because that's what they've been taught in porn. Yeah.
Yes, just a clarification. When you said 16, that is the age limit, that is the age limit of sexual consent in
Argentina.
No,
Yeah.
in the States. I don't know in Argentina. I think it must be something like 18 or something like that. No, as you spoke about mask, I have chosen for our pause a poem by Maya Angelou that is called precisely, The Mask.
What a beautiful, beautiful poem that she wrote. Do you know that she was prostituted? Yeah, I'm reading a book about that experience of hers. So when she talks about a mask, the race mask in the front of white supremacy and the mask in prostitution, she knows what she's talking about. That's for sure. Yes. Beautiful. Thank you.
Yes, it was beautiful. There is a question from Juana Rosa. Thank you for watching. She says, where can I report cases of prostitution? I guess she means child sexual exploitation, because she adds and child pornography out of Argentina. Is there a place?
Where can she report it outside of Argentina?
I guess there are judicial instances, aren't there? Outside.
I cannot answer that question myself. I'm very sorry. But if she writes me, and I would appreciate it if you would put my email up on Facebook, Veronica, so that people can write me directly at mfarley, MFARLEY at prostitutionresearch.com. She can write me there, or she can look at Prostitution Research on Facebook and message me, or ask to be friends, and just, or she can contact you and you can contact me. Here's the one thing I would say about referrals of children at great risk. You don't just walk into a police station and say, there's a child who's being trafficked or pimped. You have to know a person or an agency and the person in the agency to refer to. I have no doubt. I mean, if she told me about this case right now, there's several people in Argentina that I would immediately write and ask them, where should I send her? Who do you trust in law enforcement, in the judicial system, in the international police? I don't know if it's a case from one country into Argentina or what it is, but there are many people who are expert on that and who can talk about it way better than me. You have to know who you're referring to, you know.
Absolutely.
There are wonderful police. I guess here's the one thing I want to say. There are wonderful police that I know personally in many parts of the world that are very strong advocates for women, and there are corrupt police that you do not ever want to refer somebody to. So you have to know the agency and you have to know the individual person. I do want to talk about puteros some, but it doesn't have to be right now. If you have another question.
So let's talk about puteros, please.
Okay, great. And the issue about puteros sits in the middle of a big struggle in the world today, which is, does legal prostitution make it any better? Does it make it safer? Does it reduce rape in, for example, if we have this special class of women that you can pay for sexual gratification, even if the women don't want it, they want the money, they don't want the sex act. If you have this group of women and the state, Germany, Argentina, the US, if the state says that's legal, here's a brothel, you can go there, you can pay, but does that make it safer? So we decided we would go to the men who know more about this than I do, because they're using women in prostitution in every country in the world. And I'm very proud to say that with our partners all over the world, and we have studied for the last 15 years, men who buy sex, asking them every question we can think of about prostitution, about how they think about women, about what their attitudes are about rape. What are their attitudes about sexual violence? And we've studied 763 men in 6 countries. The countries are the United States, India, Scotland, England, Cambodia, and Germany. The thing about Germany is that's where it's legal. So wouldn't you be interested in an answer to the question, are German puteros, they're called friars in Germany, free men? Isn't that an interesting expression? Free men. What that means is they're free to do anything they want to women. That's the implication. And they tell us that about prostitution. Once she's paid for, you can do anything she wants. And in German brothels, I think people have no idea what is for sale in a legal German brothel. I can't say the name of them out loud. Actually, it's too horrible, but it has to do with, you can buy no condom for anything. That's available for money. You're not supposed to, but it's posted inside legal brothels. That puts her at horrible risk of, as you know, every STD that you can think of. You can buy the most degrading sex acts you can think of that involve feces and urine and swallowing these things. There's a price tag for them, Veronica, a price tag, so-and-so Deutschmark, so-and-so euros. That's how much you pay. This, just you take your choice, like a menu of strawberry ice cream or vanilla ice cream or chocolate, this sex act, there's a very long list. So no, it doesn't make it any safer. This is what we've discovered. It's not safer, it's not healthier. Does it reduce organized crime? Some people think that if you have legal prostitution, then the government controls it and all the bad guys go. The opposite is true. Isn't that interesting? The opposite is true. When a government, whether it's the US, Argentina, Germany, if a government says, we have legal prostitution, it's like setting out a welcome mat for pimps. come on over. You're just a businessman. Let's get you a nice place to work in Buenos Aires. We've got a nice building. You can set up shop there. Yeah, that's fine. San Francisco, sure, here's a building for you. That's what it does. It legitimizes everything that's wrong with prostitution. That's what legal does. Contrary to expectations, organized crime moves into town because they see the money. They see the money and they don't have to worry about getting arrested, and they set up business. Did you know that the Hells Angels, an organized criminal gang in the United States, Australia, Germany, UK, the Hells Angels operates every place where prostitution is legal? Nevada.
Sorry, the Hells Angels are the
Motorcycle gang.
I didn't know that they, okay.
Yeah, there are many organized crime groups who are pimping in the Netherlands and in Germany. They include the Russian mafia, the Albanian mafia, the Bulgarian mafia, the US, probably the US mafia, but also these international gangs like the Hells Angels and a group called the Bandidos, which originated in the US. And the Outlaws they also reach out to these places in other parts of the world. They're pimps and they're criminals, but they fit in just fine. You can't clean up pimping, no matter how you legalize it, and there's just no way of making prostitution safe for women. You can't do it. You can't do it.
I remember I lived in Cameroon, and there they said, no, here there are no pimps, they are freelance. It's a traditional thing. That was the most infuriating thing. A girl is kind to you and is caring. Well, you have to be reciprocal and give her something in return, no? First, the seed of violence and death that involved in prostitution. How can anyone feel pleasure in such acts, no? And
that's a great question. How can anyone feel pleasure in such acts? In order for a putero to use a woman for sexual exploitation, because that's what he wants, he has to stop empathy. He cannot feel that she is a human being just like himself. You can't do that. Probably one of the most brilliant things I learned from my interviews with men who buy sex, puteros, is this. I was interviewing a young man in London, and he called up our research line and he said, I know you're looking to interview men who've used prostitutes. He said, I've only used one woman. And I told the phone answering person, I want to talk to him. Yes, I want to know. And I wanted to know the question. I wanted to answer the question, why only one? And here's what he told me at the end of a 2-hour interview. We do 2-hour interviews with all these men, 1.5 to 2 hours. We don't just give them something to fill out. We're taking notes on them. He told me this story about how he bought this woman in London, in Soho, probably, anyway, he bought this woman. He's in the process of performing what women in prostitution call paid rape. That's what they call it, paid for rape. And as you pointed out a few minutes ago, the money camouflages the rape. It says, hey, she was paid, no problem. So he paid for a sex act that she didn't want to do, for sure. And as he was in the middle of it, Veronica, he looked in her eyes and he saw, this is what he told me. He said, I suddenly saw in her eyes the same expression I knew was on my face when a priest raped me as a child. He started crying. I started crying. I said, oh, you understand it, don't you? And he did. He was just crying. And that's what empathy does. If a man has empathy for that woman, you can't pay to rape her. You can't do it. So the men have to shut down emotionally. They have to turn off empathy, and it turns them into a real problematic kind of person. Now, along with that short story, and I know we have to quit soon, it's almost time. Along with that story, I want to tell you about somebody else's research, which is a man who did an organization that did an incredible study in 5 different countries. And what they found out was if a man has ever bought sex, in other words, one time or more, he is more likely to rape. Why? Because they go together. The attitudes that permit men to buy sex, puteros attitudes, go together with rape. The same attitudes. That violence against women is justified. Men are entitled to sex whenever they want it. That's their right in the world. These are all lies, but they're the attitudes that you have to have if you perform a sex act, whether it's rape or prostitution, which in the words of survivors are the same thing. Another survivor called it voluntary slavery. I love these words, paid rape, voluntary slavery. They teach us, as Maya Angelou says, they teach us that a lie is put on top of the abuse, just in order for everyone to survive. So if a man ever uses a woman in prostitution, it increases the likelihood that he's going to rape someone in the community, not just prostituted women. That's his attitude towards all women.
Absolutely. Unlike what they usually said, that there was a separate kind of women who would relieve, as you said, men to protect the decent and honest women. I mean,
that's right. It separates us as women. That thinking separates us into a category of good women and bad women. And I don't accept that category. You don't accept it. No feminist accepts that lie.
I don't think any decent human being could accept that, no? So just to round up, the solutions from public policies, from individual citizens, what can we do in order to protect women and girls from this sex trafficking, this sexual exploitation?
That's a very important question. I mean, in Argentina, just the way in the United States, the first thing to do is to talk with organizations of survivors and ask them what they need. That's what I did to learn, what do survivors need? At the top of the list in every country in the world, including yours and mine, is housing, housing, housing. They need a safe place to live. And they need exit services. After a woman's been in prostitution a while, she needs very good health care because her body has been brutalized. She may need substance abuse treatment because if I was living on the street and I was trying to sleep and I was terrified someone might come up to me and rape me, I would get drunk as fast as you can count, snap your fingers. I would get high with anything I could do. And women in prostitution use drugs and alcohol to protect themselves from both the physical and emotional pain. So there's both of that. So there's an urgent need for housing and exit services. Guess what? That means money. If a government wants to help women in prostitution, most of them just talk about it and they don't do enough. So they need to provide exit services. That's number one. The second thing is arrest puteros. It's a crime. In the United States, it's a more serious crime to steal a coat than it is to buy a human being. Can you believe that? A prostitution offense for a putero in the US is very small. An offense for stealing an expensive coat, boom, you go to jail for that. So that doesn't make sense to me. We have to charge puteros and the famous ones as well as the guys on the street. We have to charge politicians, movie makers, everybody, even if they're famous and rich, we need to charge them with the crime of buying sex. Sweden has that on the books, and so do 7 other countries. They have a law that says it is illegal to pay for sex. This is not a prudish law. You can have all the sex you want if people want to have sex, but you can't pay for it, which means you're in a system of coercion. So the Swedish law is pretty good. It provides both exit services and it provides arrests for sex buyers. And women who are selling, they're not arrested. The Swedish law says they're victims. They're not criminals. The criminal is the puteros and the proxenetas. Those are the ones who are arrested.
Melissa, would you like to give us a final message for the everyday person who wants to raise their social awareness about this subject?
This is about harm. This is from, I'm a feminist and I'm a researcher, and I talk about harms to women. I don't have to go into religion and Satan and evil and all of this stuff. No. So I stay away from that, to be very honest. This is not about good and bad people in the world. Here's the truth. I don't even 100% think men who buy sex are bad, evil, horrible creatures. I really don't. I think sometimes they are not smart. They're tricked by pimps. They're lied to by pornographers. They feel sorry for themselves. Yes, they're committing harms against another person, of course, but I don't think they're hopeless. I think just like all kinds of people in the world, there's hope for them changing. If I thought men could not change, I wouldn't get out of bed in the morning. I would give up and roll over and die. In fact, I think men can change, and I demand that they change. They do not have to do this, you know? So
I don't think that's so fulfilling. I don't think it's an act that fulfills even their bodies. I don't know. But yeah. I don't think that is something that they are proud of. And
but please,
I don't think that makes them happy.
Yes, please send me that link. I want to check it out. Because, you know, sometimes people quote wrong or they say this or that about me, and I appreciate the opportunity to correct it. The truth is, when you do public talks like I do, and you keep doing them, there are people with a lot of technical skills that can distort or twist or use your words. And by the way, that's exactly what happens to women who are tricked into making porn videos today. The same pimps trick them. They go online, they meet up with young women who are bored, who might want money, or who might, for example, in the case of Bogota, really need money desperately. But they might be just kids in Buenos Aires or San Francisco who just want to have some money. So somebody says, hey, I'll give you $100 if you take your shirt off for the camera. She doesn't want to do it. She's a little embarrassed. Oh, well, maybe she's at a party and she's had a few drinks and she's not smart about manipulative people in the world yet. She's only 17 or 18. Mm-hmm. So she has this picture taken. Then the next time, hey, you want 200, take off your pants. Yeah. Hey, let's, why not just get together with your boyfriend and let's take a little video. And so it goes. And women tragically end up being paid by pornography pimps for acts that are humiliating to them later or harmful. And that film can be used by any pornographer on the internet. It's sliced up and cut up. It's added with other videos. She never knows about it until maybe 5 years later, her future employer or her future husband finds it.
Or her children.
Or her children, yeah. So it's an additional harm, these films that are made of women's prostitution. It's additional harm.
Absolutely. In your essay from the International Journal of Human Rights, published in November last year, it's called Making the Connections, Resource Extraction, Prostitution, Poverty, Climate Change, and Human Rights. And it's edited by the Prostitution Research and Education Institute of San Francisco. It finishes with this paragraph that I would like to quote. It says, the Beijing platform recommended taking appropriate measures to address the root factors, including external factors that encourage trafficking in women and girls for prostitution and other forms of commercialized sex, forced marriages, and forced labor. Solutions that address these root factors are programs that help women avoid or escape prostitution via provision of food, shelter, health care, what you mentioned, including mental health care and peer support, housing and job training. Climate refugees are in need of similar programs for survival. Moreover, the provision of survival needs to all humans would begin the reduction of stratospheric economic, race, and sex inequality, including the elimination of prostitution. A coerced choice between poverty and prostitution should not be women's only alternatives. A forced choice between poverty and pollution should not be government's only options. During the carbon elimination transition and during the transition to abolition of prostitution, redistribution of wealth is critical. Economies can and must be transformed away from predatory colonial expansion in which everyone and every part of nature is commodified. Ongoing resistance to these multiple human rights violations is essential. Thank you so much indeed, Melissa. You don't know how important this is for me and for the people who are going to watch this on YouTube once I edit it properly, etc. Here we are for anything you may need as far as liaisons and links or whatever contacts to add a little bit support for your cause and for your research.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's lovely to meet you and to do this webcast with you. And I look forward to seeing it. Please send me a copy when you get it edited. And do put up our website address and maybe take a screenshot of Prostitution Research and Education. We have new information going up there all the time. Right now on our homepage, we have a small interview by, as it happens, by an Argentinian survivor, Alika Kinan. We have a little article about her on our homepage, so please check that out if you would.
Of course, Alika is one of our reasons of pride because she's the first survivor of prostitution who won a very famous process to state. No,
it's incredible what she did. It's incredible what she did. She is a leader in offering. You know, you asked about legal options. Well, the idea of suing a city where a woman is pimped is just incredible. It's a way of demanding community responsibility. And I guess I would end with just these words, which is to end prostitution, it takes a village. And I think that's the message that Alika is sending to people. Think about this. It takes a village. It takes a village turning its back on her need for shelter, protection, education, healthcare. And it takes a village to turn this around. So yes, with resource extraction, climate change, this little planet we live on, we're all next door neighbors. That's how I see it, every one of us. And we're in this together, women in prostitution and the rest of us who are their allies. So thank you, and let's stay in touch.
There are so many reasons for hope. From when I was young, this was a myth, a taboo to talk, to even mention, and even, of course, the word, you know. And now there are demonstrations everywhere. There are people like you researching. There are so many reasons for hope, and you are one of them. Thank you so much, Melissa, and see you next 9th of August, because we are celebrating our 4th anniversary. Thank you so much, and this has been everything for today. Thank you to everybody who has followed us. And this has been Life in Violet, raising feminist consciousness at a global level. Stay tuned.